Hi, welcome to Your Future, Your Finances. I'm your host, Brian Kuhn. Today we're talking about estate planning, getting your documents in order and making sure your life is mapped out to your wishes. Today I'm talking with Rick Todd, business and estate attorney in Columbia, Maryland. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Give us your background. How long have you been doing this and specialties?
I do primarily estate planning. I do a little bit of real estate law as well, a little bit of business, but mostly estate planning. My background is I was in the financial industry, but from a marketing perspective, and I worked overseas, and then I transitioned a few years ago to being an estate planning attorney, and I've had a law degree for about a decade now. Mm-hmm. So it seemed like a natural fit because estate planning is, it goes hand in hand with financial planning, and many people consider it to be the final piece of the puzzle, or the financial planning puzzle.
Mm-hmm. So if somebody's starting from square one, they go see you, they tend to not have any documents, as most people procrastinate. So where do they start?
Okay, well, if they come to me with nothing, I explain to them what I give them. So estate planning is generally a will, powers of attorney, and in Maryland it's called an advance directive. Mm-hmm. I also give a final disposition, which means what you want done with your body after you die. Mm-hmm. And I also, if they have children, I give them a guardian nomination. They nominate an individual or two individuals who are married to be the guardians of their children in case they and their spouse die. Mm-hmm. And that's the package. Mm-hmm. And it varies, but most attorneys give the will, the powers of attorney, and the advance directive to a client. Mm-hmm.
And then oftentimes it comes up the differences between a will or doing what's called a trust. So what's the difference?
Right. Okay. So there are many types of trusts. There's sort of a rivalry in the estate planning industry. The rivalry is between giving a client a will or a revocable living trust. Mm-hmm. A revocable living trust allows you to, they function very similarly. Mm-hmm. You are able to take the assets of your estate and give them to your heirs, your loved ones. And a revocable living trust allows you to avoid probate. A will does not. You go through probate. The probate process is, in brief, an administrative process that you work hand in hand with local government, and they work with your loved ones to administer the estate, to distribute it to the people you selected. Mm-hmm. Revocable living trusts are more expensive than wills. Mm-hmm. They're much more complex, and they oftentimes don't work. Well, I don't want to say they sometimes don't work. Mm-hmm. Because in order for them to work, you need to take the assets of your estate and retitle them so that they are transferred to the revocable living trust. Mm-hmm. And with a will, you don't have to do that. You just write a will. So there's not, in Maryland, the probate process is so simple and inexpensive that there's really no reason to avoid it. Mm-hmm. That's not necessarily true in all the other states, but I feel it's true in the state of Maryland. Mm-hmm. And a will, there's also, it's hard to make mistakes with a will.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned the other documents in the package. One of them is a POA, or a power of attorney. So right. What sort of things are you answering or putting in writing in that document?
Well, the powers of attorney, people are confused by it because they think that it's part of, it only comes into play when you die. Powers of attorney is for when you're still alive, mm-hmm. but you do not have mental capacity. You are incompetent. That's really a legal term, meaning that you cannot make basic decisions. So you have dementia, you're in a coma, things like that. Mm-hmm. So you've chosen someone to be your agent, and they can make financial decisions for you, and that can include paying bills, cashing out of a bank account, or moving stocks to bonds, things like that, mm-hmm. to control your finances, essentially. Mm-hmm. And once you die, that document is useless. It's mm-hmm. worthless. With the living will, or advance directive, as it's called in this state, you're choosing someone to make medical decisions for you. And that also means not only making medical decisions for you, but also determining when you want care withdrawn, to put it bluntly, when you want the plug pulled, yeah. Or food and water withdrawn. Mm-hmm. And so for my clients, I use the statutory forms, which have blanks in them, but I feel those have more authority, or possibly more authority, than a form drafted by an attorney.
Mm-hmm. What happens if someone goes into the hospital and they don't have that form and their spouse is there? Can the hospital still communicate generally with the spouse?
Generally, yes, and I think that they will. The spouse will be able to make medical decisions for their spouse.
But they won't have any direction unless they've talked about it in the past. So.
Right, they won't have direction, and I think that this, by having an advance directive, you set out in stone exactly what you want done if you become ill.
And what happens if it's not a spouse? Then can they take any direction or guidance from someone if they can't communicate with?
That's a very good question, and I'll have to get back to you on that one.
So that's why you would have the document, I guess, then.
Right, the document is a clarification.
So the will and the living trust, to get back to that, that used to be, or still is, I suppose, having to do with taxes, like avoiding taxes.
Well, revocable living trust used to be used to avoid the estate tax, which is also known as the death tax. A lot of people still use that term, but it's the estate tax. The revocable living trust does not offer any tax protection. There are trusts that do offer tax protection from the estate tax. They're very expensive. Most people at this time do not need to worry about the estate tax because it's for people who are extremely wealthy. That may change, and the estate tax used to be much lower even as recently as the late 1990s. So it's, while I say that you should not worry about the estate tax, over time that may change. So you should just be aware of that and watch the news. And if there is a change, you should contact your estate planning attorney.
Okay, we're going to take a break. We'll talk more about business law, real estate law, as well as the book you wrote on retiring overseas. That's an interesting topic for a lot of people these days. We'll be right back. You're watching Your Future, Your Finances.
So, I got this new family, and I don't know what it is about this one, but she can't seem to put down that toy all day long. Tap, 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 tap. Oh, and she even talks to it. She talks to that more than she talks to him. What's up, bro? Nice shirt. Who's she talking to? Her mom? She talks to her mom a lot.
Hi, welcome to Your Future, Your Finances. We're continuing our conversation with Rick Todd, business and estate attorney in Columbia, Maryland. Welcome.
Thank you.
So we were talking about the documents that one should have. Let's say they've made that decision. They have these important legal documents. What do they do next with them?
Well, they need to store them. There's three basic options you have. So you can go to your Register of Wills, which will be in the county you reside in. And you can register your will. You don't need to be dead to register your will. You can register it before you die. And there's a small fee for that. But the problem with that is they only take the will. They're not going to take the other documents that are part of your estate plan, like your powers of attorney and your advance directive. So you also could put in a safe in your house, but you need to be aware of fire risk, and you need to position the safe in your house so that in an area where it's less likely to be hit by fire. And it should be bolted to the ground because if a thief were to come into your house, they're going to take the safe. And that makes it more difficult if it's bolted, obviously. A third option, which I prefer, is a safe deposit box. Safe deposit box is something you can distribute keys to other people who you trust to have access to that box if you become sick and or pass away, and they can grab the box and then take it to the Register of Wills. And in talking to bank managers, a safe deposit box is really it's run in such a way that it's highly unlikely that it'll be lost or destroyed, like it would be if you keep it in your home. And I think the big fear is that as you get older, you may suffer from dementia, have some sort of mental illness, and misplace your documents, and that's a common problem.
Yeah. So transitioning to business. So let's say you're running a business and you have employees and so forth, and they come to you. What are the basic things that you help them protect or document?
Well, people who own businesses need to be aware that they can write a sort of business will. They're called buy-sell agreements. They need to plan, and this even goes outside of estate planning, but it's a conversation. They need to understand their business will live beyond them, or they may wish for this. And they need to find a successor to manage it. And their children may not be qualified. Their children may, that's not to say their children aren't smart enough to, but their children may have other interests. And it may be better to talk to someone about buying the business if you become incapacitated or die. And then the money from that sale will go to your heirs. And those agreements are called buy-sell agreements. And they're very common. And I think it's just important for the owner of a business to have discussions with their employees and other management about the transition when they are no longer there, and to even if that means putting a child in place, an adult child of their own in place to be a manager or someone else. That's the type of conversation that needs to happen. And I think a lot of business owners are too busy dealing with day-to-day management to understand that and deal with that.
So a buy-sell is like a business will. I like that term.
It's a business will, yeah.
Yeah, it's a good way of describing it. And that would take into account them leaving the business to their kids, or in the scenario of wanting to sell the business.
Right, exactly. It will cover all the bases.
Okay, good. And then you deal with real estate law. So what does that typically entail?
Well, I do a little bit of it. In my, I live in a bedroom community in Columbia, and I feel that the big industries in a bedroom community are living and dying and buying and selling a home. So I like to be available to help people review their contracts. If they're selling it on their own without a real estate agent, I can draft a contract for them, and they can save a lot of money doing that as opposed to going to a real estate agent. And in terms of retitling deeds, I can also do that type of thing.
Retitling deeds, okay. So like the trust thing, if you had to put some property into a trust, that would be retitling the deed.
Yes, that's possible. I mean, there's issues with that. If you're dealing with a lender, they may not be as agreeable to retitling it. And that's another issue with using trusts and transferring property into trusts.
Okay, good. So another area of law and planning that you deal with, which is very interesting, is the concept of retiring overseas, which I hear come up a lot, or at least people consider it. And
Right.
you actually wrote a book on the topic.
I wrote a book on the topic because I used to live overseas. It's not as common in this country as it is in some other Western countries, like Great Britain. It's very big among the British to retire overseas. To save money. For Americans, saving money in retirement by moving to a cheaper location, there are places within the United States that are very affordable. So, and you have Medicare. And overseas, you obviously will not have Medicare. But living overseas you have to approach it from the standpoint that you're not necessarily going to save money. Even if you move to a poorer country, you're doing it to be in an exotic location, something that's different.
Can you move there like part-time and have some of the advantages and things like that?
Sure. And there's the term snowbird. Canadians use it a lot as well. If you live in a cold climate, you're going to ditch the winter and move south and then move back when it gets warm again. I think that's very common. I think that's a very good solution. My book goes into detail about the risks of moving to unstable countries, where it's affordable, but with that affordability comes instability and sometimes danger.
Yeah. So what's the name of the book?
The Financial Guide to Retiring Abroad.
To retiring abroad. Fantastic. Okay, good. So what are some things to think about? Because you said Medicare you can't use internationally.
No, you can't.
So healthcare is probably a major...
Healthcare is an issue, but healthcare, generally speaking, is very affordable overseas, even in expensive countries like in Western Europe. What you can get, though, is you can get your Social Security payments. And in fact, many countries will not give you a retirement visa without proof of income. And you prove that you have income by showing them that you're a recipient of Social Security.
Okay, good. All right, well, if somebody's considering this or have any questions regarding getting their documents done, which they definitely should do, how can they get in touch with you?
My website is probably the best way, ColumbiaEstatePlanning.com.
Fantastic. All right, thanks for coming on the show. Appreciate it. You're watching